Present with Confidence. This is the fourth installment in the Communicate with Confidence workshop series. If you have missed our earlier sessions, you're welcome to access those recordings on our website. Today, we're going to be talking about presenting, public speaking, basically. I would like you to think, before I begin on talking about the content I prepared, I would like you to think about a good presentation that you've listened to recently. Maybe it was an in-person session you've attended, or maybe it was something that you heard online, like a formal presentation online. I'd like you to think about what made it, quote unquote, good. What was it about that presentation that made it good to you? My guess is maybe it was something to do with the content itself. Perhaps the topic was interesting. Maybe it was the way the speaker interacted with the audience. The speaker was engaging, or the way the speaker spoke was very clear and it was easy to follow what the speaker was saying. Perhaps you noted the confidence that the speaker spoke with, and we could go on. I'm sure there's other things that would constitute a good presentation. But something that I want us to note is that these things don't just happen. Time and effort are required to prepare for the content and delivery of what would be considered a good presentation. Presenting well is a skill, and a skill is something that we can all learn and practice. So my guess is some of you may be joining me here today because you've been asked to do an online or a public presentation or in-class presentation in one of your classes. These assignments are excellent opportunities to learn and practice your presentation skills. Some things that they can help us do are when we deliver an in-class presentation, we can practice speaking in a professional context. We can practice sharing our ideas in a clear, concise, and organized manner. And we can also practice the opportunity to practice engaging with our audience. So for today, we're going to focus on how we can help build our public speaking skills and help you as you potentially do in-class presentations, but also beyond, as you might need to do presentations beyond your course of study here at the college. The goal for today, for this next 30 minutes or so, is to share presenting strategies to deliver a message that's clear and to deliver your message in a convincing way. And to do that, we're going to focus on two key questions here. So we're going to focus on the content, what will you say? And then the delivery, how will you say it? So we're going to use these two questions as our guiding questions for this presentation. So firstly, content, what will you say? When we're preparing a presentation, we want to first of all consider the message that we're going to communicate. And we want to consider two key questions when we're doing that. First of all, who is your audience? And then what is your objective? So more specifically, we want to think about who we're going to be speaking to. We want to ask ourselves, what do they already know? What do they need to know? Are there any gaps that you might need to fill in as a speaker in order to clearly communicate your message? And also you want to ask yourself, what vocabulary and tone would be appropriate? The vocabulary and tone you might use with your colleagues or your classmates might be different than if you're presenting to a CEO of a company or potentially to a younger group of children, right? So who our audience is will determine what type of vocabulary and tone would be appropriate. We also want to ask ourselves what the objective is to this presentation. So what is it that you want your audience to know, to think, or do after your presentation? Sometimes you may be preparing a presentation for a class assignment. So in that case, then you want to ask yourself, what guidelines are in your assignment instructions and rubric that will obviously shape what your objective is for this particular presentation? But your objective needs to be clear to you, because if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to your audience, right? So you really, before diving into the details of your presentation, you need to know what it is you want your audience to know, to think, or do after you've finished sharing your message with them. Once you've determined your objective, then you want to ask what main points will help you achieve your objective. Now, I would suggest to try to aim for 3 or 4 main points. If we include 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 main points, that may become overwhelming to your audience, and chances are they may not remember what those main points were. Now, obviously, if you're preparing a presentation for a class and there are specific instructions where you need to cover more than 3 or 4 main points, you would need to adjust that based on what those assignment requirements are. However, in general, try to aim for 3 or 4 main points to help ensure that your audience will remember what those points are. After determining your main points, then, you also want to ask yourself, what supporting information will you use to develop those main points? So you can see here on the screen, I have a mind map. Perhaps you use another method for organizing your ideas, but you do want to take some time to clearly map out what your main points are and how you're going to describe or support those main points. Once you've determined what the details are of your presentation, then you want to think how you're going to put it together. You're going to want to organize your presentation. Just like any good story, a presentation should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning, your introduction, the middle, the body, and your end, the conclusion. Let's just take a look at each of these in turn. For your introduction, it's your chance to capture your audience's attention. So you want to begin with some sort of what we call hook. Some examples of a hook might be a quote, an interesting quotation, maybe a statistic that's relevant to the topic you're talking about, or maybe an interesting story that you feel would capture your audience's attention and set the stage for the topic of your speech. Once you've caught your audience's attention, then you want to make sure you clearly state your objective and provide an outline of your main points. When you give a preview and an outline of your main points, this will help your audience follow along. They're going to know what to expect, and they're going to be able to prepare mentally for what you're going to be talking about in the body of your presentation. For the body of your presentation, the middle section, you're going to go into each main point and describe them in turn. When you transition from one main point to another, I'd recommend to use some sort of signpost to indicate to your audience that you're moving from one main point to another. So on the screen, I have the words first, second, and third. Of course, there are many other ways that you can do this as well. But the importance of signposts is that they help provide clarity for your audience. Your audience will be able to better understand when you're moving from one main point to another. It will also help you sound more confident and organized as you're presenting your ideas. When you introduce each main point, I would recommend to state your main point first and then go on to provide relevant details. We call this front-loading your message. You want to make it very clear to your audience what is your main point and what are the supporting details. And we can do this by the way we order our information. Throughout your presentation, whether it be in the body, the intro, conclusion, I'd recommend to use words that you're comfortable and familiar with. You do not need to use big fancy words just to sound professional. Obviously, you may need to use industry-specific vocabulary, but in general, avoid simply using big words just for the sake of using big words. So make sure you're using words that you're going to feel comfortable with, because this will help you present more confidently. After the middle comes the end, the conclusion, and here you want to summarize your main points and restate your objective. We don't want our audience to forget what the point of this presentation is. We do want to avoid introducing new information. However, try to avoid simply ending your presentation by saying, well, that's all I have. You want to find a way to end strong. Some ways you could end strong are by referring back to the hook that you used in your introduction. Perhaps if it's relevant, you might want to include a call to action, or very simply, you may just thank the audience for their attention. But you want to find some way to end strong rather than just let your speech fizzle out at the end. So that's a little bit of what will you say, the content. Now let's move on to the delivery. How will you say it? In oral communication, how we say something is really just as important as what we say. And this can include both vocal and visual elements. We're going to look at each of these in turn. Vocal elements are referring to how you sound. How you sound will have an impact on how others will receive your message. It can affect a variety of things. One, it can affect how your audience will perceive your level of confidence and expertise. It will also affect, or can affect, how clearly and effectively your content comes across to your audience. And finally, it can affect your audience's level of interest and attention. There are multiple things I could focus on for vocal elements, but for today, we're going to focus on two: intonation and pace. Intonation is how the pitch of your voice rises or falls. I changed my intonation there. And pace is how quickly you speak. I'm going to look at both of these here, but one thing I want you to remember as I do is in English, it's very important to have a variety in our intonation and our pace. Let's look at intonation more specifically. I have an excerpt on the screen and I'm going to read it out shortly. I'm going to read it 2 times and I want you to listen for the way that I read it. And I want you to think which example is more interesting and why. So the first example. Today, I'm going to share with you how to engage your audience more effectively when delivering your presentation. First, try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. It's important to vary your tone of voice because this creates more interest for your audience. Example 2. Today, I'm going to share with you how to engage your audience more effectively when delivering a presentation. First, try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. It's important to vary your tone of voice because this creates more interest for your audience. My guess is probably you found example 2 more interesting. And hopefully you noticed in example 1, I really did not change my intonation at all. I had no rising and falling on my voice. I was speaking in a monotone voice. Example 2, I put in a lot more variation in my intonation. We sound more interesting and enthusiastic when we include variation in our intonation. One way that you can vary intonation is to simply add emphasis to at least one word in each sentence. Most often we'll emphasize the last main word of a thought, but really as a speaker, you can choose to emphasize any word that you want your audience to focus on. So if I take that text in the orange box there where it says, try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. If I were to emphasize the last word, I might say it like this: try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. Or I could try emphasizing the monotone. Try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. Maybe I want to emphasize that you need to avoid this, and so I'll emphasize that word avoid. Try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. So I've made changes based on what I want my audience to focus on, and I'm using intonation to do that. We can also project confidence when we focus on what intonation we're using at the end of a sentence. Listen to how I read this sentence again. Try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice, or try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. The first one I had rising intonation, the last one I had falling intonation. If I constantly speak with rising intonation at the end of my sentence, I run the risk of showing that I'm not as confident in what I'm saying. So we want to try to have falling intonation at the end of most of our sentences because we're going to project confidence. Otherwise, it sounds like I'm asking a question. Another aspect of vocal delivery is the pace, how quickly we're speaking. I have the same excerpt on the screen here, and I'm going to read this in 2 different ways. And again, I want you to note which example is easier to follow. Example 1. Today, I'm going to share with you how to engage your audience more effectively when delivering a presentation. First, try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. It's important to vary your tone of voice because this creates more interest for your audience. Sorry to my ASL interpreter. Second one. Today, I'm going to share with you how to engage your audience more effectively when delivering a presentation. First, try to avoid speaking in a monotone voice. It's important to vary your tone of voice because this creates more interest for your audience. My guess again is example 2 was easier to follow, and hopefully you noted that the change of pace. The first one, I was going really fast, way too fast for anyone to really be able to follow me effectively. The second one, I had more variation in my pace. I slowed it down a little bit more, and I was pausing. So hopefully you saw that example 2 was much easier for my audience to follow. So as we're speaking, even when we're nervous, we want to ensure that we're controlling our rate of speech. Try to aim to speak at a moderate rate, but you can slow down for more important points and you can speed up for less important information. Again, variety is fine. Variety is actually better, even in our pace. When we speak at a moderate rate, though, in general, though, our audience will be able to follow us more easily. And you also, as a speaker, will have more control over what you're saying and how you're saying it. Otherwise, the words just get jumbled together. Again, especially if you're nervous. One way you can help control your rate of speech is by pausing. So try saying one thought and then pause slightly. We do this naturally, like when you write, you put a period at the end of a sentence, right? So wherever you might put a period, try pausing, even for a millisecond. Or where you might put a comma, try pausing. Sometimes we also choose to pause in the middle of the sentence, and that can be a way to help slow us down as well. Again, pausing will help you control your pace, and it will also give your audience a chance to think about what you've said. If you're presenting brand new information to an audience, maybe they're thinking in overtime. It's all live. They can't back you up. They can't rewind you, right? It's not a recording. So if you go from one new point to another without any sort of pauses at all, it's much more difficult for your audience to keep up with you. But by inserting small pauses here and there, it just gives your audience that chance their brains need to be able to follow you more effectively. After vocal elements, we also want to consider visual elements. So how do you look and present yourself? How we look and present ourselves, again, can impact how our audience will interpret our message. One, it can help you look like you know what you're talking about. It can help us appear more confident. It can also help us connect with our audience. Again, there are multiple elements I could have focused on, but for today, I'm going to focus on 3. 1, eye contact, 2, posture, and 3, visual aids. So first of all, eye contact. We communicate with people when we look at them. So we can communicate confidence with our audience when we look at them. Now, for some of you, I know this may be very challenging. And for some people, they find it very difficult to look at their audience. One suggestion I would have is to try sharing one thought with one face at a time. So I look at one person in the audience, I share one sentence with that person. I look down at my notes, I look at another person in the audience, and I share one sentence with that person, and so on. What this can do is it helps you connect with your audience on a different level. And it can also help calm you down as you're focusing on individual people rather than a whole sea of faces in front of you. So one thing to try, especially if you've had challenges with this in the past. We also want to consider eye contact when we're doing online presentations. Obviously, I'm not looking at you in the eye right now, but I am looking into the camera. And so hopefully it simulates that I'm making eye contact with you. So this is a good way that you can help your audience, your online audience, to feel that you're connecting with them, that you're engaging with them as a speaker, simply by looking into the camera. Another thing we want to keep in mind regarding visual elements is our posture. Having good posture can help you as a speaker feel more confident and also appear more confident to other people. If you come in and someone's all slouched over or not with their head down, obviously they're not communicating confidence to their audience. So when we're in front of people and we're standing in front of people, try keeping relaxed shoulders but keeping them back. We want to try to have our feet shoulder width apart so you can maintain good balance as you're up in front of people, and also avoid locking your knees. Try to have loose knees because there's going to be some natural movement to your body. We also want to consider posture when we're sitting, if we're doing an online presentation. One, you want to position your camera well. So on the screen there, I have a screenshot of 2 people, and you can see them from their upper torsos and above. So you want to position your camera so that the camera is capturing you from about that point of your body and upwards. Try sitting on the edge of the seat to ensure that you have good posture and you're avoiding slouching as well. Again, this will help you as a presenter feel more confident, and it will also help the audience think that you are more confident as well. The next one I want to cover regarding visual elements are visual aids. And specifically, we're going to talk about PowerPoint slides. Now, I'm going to show you a PowerPoint slide in just a moment. As I do so, I want you to consider what are the issues that you see with this slide. So here's my PowerPoint slide. Just a moment. So what issues do you see with this slide? My guess is you're noticing a lot of words on this screen, a lot of text. There are some clip arts here. We see that one clip art is in the way, is kind of covering some of the information. We could say perhaps these are not the most professional clip arts. And as this information was entering onto the slide, you may have noticed I had a lot of animations. Now, animations are fine, but this was a little bit overdone. So let's compare this slide with this next slide. Same information, but hopefully you can see a difference in how it's laid out. Much more professional, hopefully easier for you as the audience to read and follow. So we want to remember that things like PowerPoint slides are aids. They're meant to help communicate our message. And so we want to think, how can I use the aid to help me effectively communicate my message without getting in the way or being distracted to my message? Visual aids are another element in how we present our message because they can help our audience understand and hopefully remember our content. Some tips to keep in mind for using PowerPoint slides effectively is to minimize the content on each slide. If you have too much text, your audience will simply be reading the information instead of listening to you as you present. You want to ensure that you have a legible font size and style. And you obviously want to check for grammar and spelling because that can distract from your message if your audience is noting mistakes on your slides. And finally, I would strongly recommend to practice your slides in presentation mode once you've completed them to ensure that there's going to be a smooth flow to your presentation slides or to your PowerPoint slides. I would also recommend to prepare your PowerPoint slides after you have determined and organized your message as opposed to diving right in. Again, this will help ensure that there's a logical flow of information and that you're clearly outlining your objective, your main points, and your supporting points. So we've talked about the importance of focusing on content and focusing on delivery, how we practice. And we've talked about two important key elements of delivery, the visual elements and the vocal elements. I want to really highlight the importance, though, of practicing, just practicing in general. As I said earlier at the beginning, giving presentations is a skill, and we can all improve our presentation skills by practicing. So you've honed your message, you've thought through how you want to deliver it, and you've prepared maybe your slides or another way you're going to deliver your presentation. Now you need to practice putting it all together. There's different ways you could practice. You may want to try recording yourself, especially if you're going to be doing an online presentation. I know it's sometimes hard to listen to ourselves in a recording, but it can be very eye-opening to you to see, how is your audience going to hear you? And then perhaps there's things that you can tweak or work on to help improve your delivery of your presentation. You may want to try practicing in the room where you will give the presentation, especially if you feel quite nervous when you're up in front of a classroom. Try seeing if you can get into that classroom ahead of time to do a run through so you're used to delivering in that space. You may want to try presenting in front of an audience. Is there a family member or some friends who can be your audience so that they can give you some feedback and you can get used to speaking in front of other people? And finally, you're welcome to connect with a tutor to ask for feedback. I'm one of the tutors here, and there are many others. We'd love to meet with you and give you feedback on your presentation. So in summary, again, as I've said before, delivering effective presentations is a skill that we can all learn and practice on. So to help you deliver an effective presentation with confidence, remember to focus on these two key things: your content and delivery. Content, consider your audience. Determine what your goal and your main points are, and organize your main points. On the delivery side of things, think about how you will say it. What vocal elements do you need to focus on, and how will you present yourself? What visual elements will you practice? And finally, don't forget to practice.